If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food? Said the little girl at a public talent show. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The studio lights blazed overhead, casting a brilliant glow across the polished stage of America's Rising Star. The audience hummed with anticipation as the host adjusted his tie, preparing to introduce the next contestant. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our next performer is... The host's voice trailed off as a small figure stepped tentatively from the shadows. The audience fell silent. Standing center stage was a thin girl no older than 9, with tangled hair and clothes that hung loosely on her frame. In her arms, she cradled a weathered guitar held together with duct tape. Her sneakers were worn through at the toes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" asked one of the How. Judges, a famous singer known for her glamorous style. The girl swallowed hard, her knuckles white against the neck of her guitar. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear enough to carry through the entire studio. "My name is Melody." The stern-faced producer judge leaned forward. "And what will you be singing for us today, Melody?" Instead of answering his question, Melody asked one of her own, 6 words that would change everything. "If I sing well, will you feed me?" The studio fell into stunned silence. The camera operators exchanged glances. One of the judges put a hand to her mouth. In the control room, producers frantically whispered into headsets. Something about this child was different. There was no stage parent hovering nearby, no rehearsed cuteness, just a hungry girl with a broken guitar and eyes that had seen too much. In the audience, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor Wright sat forward in her seat. She had come to the taping on a whim, trying to fill empty days. Now she couldn't look away from the child's face. "Of course you'll get food, sweetheart," the female judge finally said, her voice cracking slightly. "You'll get food regardless of how you sing." Melody nodded solemnly, as if completing a business transaction. Then, with surprising grace, she positioned her small fingers on the guitar strings. The first note hung in the air, pure and perfect. When she began to sing, her voice transformed the atmosphere, clear as mountain water, carrying emotions no child her age should understand. She sang of empty rooms and waiting for someone who never returns, of sleeping in safe corners and finding beauty in small kindnesses. The song wasn't polished or technically perfect, but it carried truth that professionals spend lifetimes trying to capture. The stern judge's face softened. A tear tracked down the cheek of the glamorous singer. The audience held its collective breath. In her seat, Eleanor felt something stir within her, a recognition she couldn't explain, a protective instinct long dormant. As Melody finished the final verse, the studio remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then applause erupted, building into a standing ovation. Melody looked startled, clutching her guitar closer. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" asked the stern judge, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it. Melody shrugged. "Nobody taught me. I just listened to the music in the park." "And where are your parents, honey?" the female judge asked carefully. Melody's expression closed like a door. "I need to go now. Do I get food first or after?" The camera caught a close-up of Eleanor's face in the audience, her hand pressed against her heart, tears in her eyes. "That child," she whispered to herself, "that child needs someone." The backstage area of America's Rising Star erupted into chaos the moment Melody walked off camera. Production assistants rushed in all directions while the floor manager frantically signaled for a commercial break. The judges huddled together, speaking in hushed, concerned tones. Melody stood alone in the middle of this storm, still clutching her worn guitar, her eyes darting nervously between the adults surrounding her. That was amazing, simply amazing. A woman with a clipboard and a headset approached, kneeling to meet Melody at eye level. "I'm Tiffany, one of the producers. We need to get you set up in the green room right away. Everyone's going to want to talk to you." Melody took a small step back. "Is there food in the green room?" Tiffany's professional smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll get you whatever you want." Meanwhile, in the audience, Eleanor Wright remained seated long after others had left for the intermission. Her mind raced with questions about the little girl with the haunting voice. Something about Melody had awakened memories Eleanor had spent years trying to forget. Memories of another talented young woman who had slipped through her fingers. "Ma'am?" A security guard approached. "The studio audience needs to clear out for the next segment." Eleanor nodded absently, then suddenly made a decision. "Who's in charge of the contestants? I need to speak with them about that little girl." The guard shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am, contestants are off limits to audience members." In the green room, Melody sat perched on the edge of an oversized sofa, a plate of untouched sandwiches beside her. Her eyes widened at the large flat-screen television showing her performance being replayed. Several smartphones around the room displayed notifications popping up rapidly. "You're trending already," exclaimed a young assistant. 10,000 views in 5 minutes. Victoria Reed, the show's executive producer, observed from the doorway. Her calculating eyes took in everything. The girl's worn clothes, the battered guitar, the way Melody carefully wrapped a sandwich in a napkin and slipped it into her pocket. "We need to find out her story," Victoria whispered to her assistant. "But carefully. This could be ratings gold if handled properly." She approached Melody with a practiced warm smile. "That was quite a performance, young lady. You certainly have a gift." Melody shrugged. "My grandpa said everyone has something special. Mine is just making music." "And where is your grandfather?" "Now?" Victoria asked gently. "Heaven," Melody answered simply, looking down at her guitar. "He gave me this before he went." Victoria's expression softened genuinely for a moment. "I'm sorry to hear that. And your parents? Are they waiting somewhere for you?" Melody's fingers tightened around the neck of her guitar, her knuckles whitening. "Can I play another song now?" Outside the studio, Eleanor sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel though the engine wasn't running. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and searched America's Rising Star plus Homeless Girl. Already clips were appearing online, comment sections filling with theories and concern. Eleanor stared at Melody's image on her phone screen. The child's eyes held something hauntingly familiar, a look Eleanor had seen before, in another pair of eyes, many years ago. "Sarah," she whispered, the name she allowed herself to speak aloud. "She reminds me of you." With sudden determination, Eleanor started her car and pulled out of the parking lot. If the studio wouldn't let her in, she would find another way to help this child. Some connections were too important to ignore, even if she didn't yet understand why. Back in the green room, Melody finally took a small bite of sandwich, watching the adults whisper about her when they thought she wasn't looking. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the evening sky was turning purple with sunset. "I should go soon," she murmured to her guitar. Before they start asking the hard questions, morning light streamed through the windows of Eleanor Wright's modest apartment as she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts. Her television played a news segment on low volume, showing Melody's audition for the 5th time since dawn. "The mystery girl who took America's Rising Star by storm has captured hearts nationwide," the reporter announced. Social media has exploded with speculation about her background, while show producers promise more information in upcoming episodes. Eleanor muted the TV and turned back to her laptop, where she had been searching public records for hours. 30 years as a school counselor before retirement had taught her that children in trouble rarely appeared out of nowhere. Someone, somewhere had failed this child. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. With a deep breath, she typed a name she hadn't searched in years: Sarah Wright. Meanwhile, at the luxury hotel where contestants were housed, Melody woke up startled in a bed larger than any she'd ever slept in. For a moment, panic gripped her as she tried to remember where she was. Then she spotted her guitar propped carefully against a chair, and reality came flooding back. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Melody, it's Tiffany. Are you awake, sweetheart?" Melody quickly grabbed her backpack from beside the bed and clutched it to her chest before answering. Yes. Tiffany entered with a bright smile and a rolling cart of breakfast food. We've got a big day ahead. The production team wants to film your backstory segment this morning. My backstory? Melody asked cautiously. You know where you came from? How you learned to sing? Your family? Tiffany trailed off, noticing Melody's expression. Just the parts you want to share, of course. Melody's fingers traced the worn edge of her backpack. I don't think I want to do that. Tiffany's smile faltered. Well, all contestants need a backstory segment. It's in the contract. I didn't sign any contract, Melody said quietly. Across town, Brian Miller sat at his cluttered desk at Child Protective Services, reviewing the file that had just been placed on his desk marked urgent. The night supervisor had flagged the case after recognizing Melody on the show. 10 reports in 3 years, Brian muttered, flipping through. Documentation of concerned citizens spotting a child matching Melody's description, sleeping in parks or playing for coins at the farmer's market. And we never managed to locate her. His phone rang. It was his supervisor. Have you seen the news? That's our ghost case, the busker girl. The show knows we're coming, but they're not happy about it. Brian grabbed his jacket. I'll head over now. Has anyone located the mother yet? Sarah Duncan? No recent records. Last admission was County General, psychiatric ward 18 months ago. Voluntary check-in, voluntary discharge, then nothing. Brian paused, hand on the doorknob. Wait, did you say Duncan? I thought her name was Fisher. She's used multiple names. There's also a Wright somewhere in her history. At the hotel, Victoria Reed was growing impatient. The network is breathing down my neck for a follow-up segment. This could be the highest-rated season in years if we play this right. Her assistant shifted uncomfortably. CPS called. They're sending someone over. Victoria sighed dramatically. Stall them. Get the girl to hair and makeup. We need to film something before the bureaucrats take over. But when they knocked on Melody's door, the room was empty. The breakfast sat untouched. The guitar was gone. Security footage would later show a small figure slipping out through a service entrance, guitar case strapped to her back. Eleanor was just leaving her apartment when her phone rang with an unknown number. Mrs. Wright, this is Brian Miller from Child Protective Services. I understand you've been making inquiries about a child named Melody who appeared on television last night. Eleanor froze. How did you know that? The show's staff mentioned someone matching your description asking questions at the studio. Mrs. Wright, did you know this child before the show? Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. No, but I think she might be connected to my family. My daughter, Sarah. A call-waiting beep interrupted her. The studio's number flashed on her screen. I have to take this, she told. Brian quickly. Can we meet? This is important. She switched calls. Hello? Mrs. Wright, this is security at America's Rising Star. The girl is gone. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lincoln Park as Eleanor's car pulled to a stop at the curb. Her heart raced as she scanned the tree-lined pathways and open spaces where weekend visitors were beginning to gather. According to the security guard, Melody had asked a hotel employee about the nearest park before disappearing. If I were a young musician with nowhere to go, Eleanor murmured to herself, where would I hide? She clutched the small photograph she'd brought along, a faded image of her daughter Sarah at age 16, holding a piano competition trophy. The resemblance to Melody was subtle, but unmistakable, particularly around the eyes. Eleanor stepped out of her car and began walking, drawn to the sounds of a weekend. Farmers market at the far end of the park. Street performers often gathered there, creating a perfect cover for a child with a guitar. Across the city, Brian Miller was engaged in an increasingly tense conversation with Victoria Reed in the hotel's conference room. This isn't just about your show anymore, Ms. Reed, Brian explained firmly. We have a vulnerable minor who's been living in dangerous conditions. Your team should have contacted authorities immediately. Victoria tapped manicured nails against the polished table. We followed protocol. The child didn't disclose any specific concerns, and we provided safe accommodations. Safe accommodations, she's now fled, Brian countered, and I find it interesting that you managed to get releases signed without a legal guardian present. Victoria's smile tightened. I assure you, everything was in order. Then you won't mind providing me with copies of all those forms, Brian responded, holding her gaze steadily. Before Victoria could answer, her assistant burst into the room. We've got something. A street vendor near Lincoln Park recognized Melody from the news. Says she's a regular at the weekend market. Meanwhile, Eleanor wandered through stalls of fresh produce and handcrafted goods, stopping occasionally to listen when she heard music. A violinist playing classical pieces, a jazz quartet, a teenager with a ukulele, but no sign of Melody. Then, at the far edge of the market where the crowds thinned, Eleanor heard it, a hauntingly familiar melody floating from behind a large oak tree. She approached slowly, careful not to startle the small figure seated on a bench, guitar in lap, case open on the ground with a few scattered coins inside. Melody's fingers moved across the strings with natural grace as she sang softly, her voice carrying just far enough to catch the attention of passing shoppers. She looked up briefly between songs, scanning the crowds with watchful eyes that had learned to spot trouble coming. Eleanor stood at a distance, suddenly uncertain. What right did she have to approach this child? What if she was wrong about their connection? As she hesitated, a market security guard noticed Melody and began walking purposefully in her direction. Eleanor recognized the look, someone about to remove a nuisance performer without a permit. Excuse me, Eleanor called out, hurrying forward. There you are, sweetheart. I've been looking everywhere for you. Melody looked up, startled, recognition flickering in her eyes from the studio audience. The security guard paused. This child with you, ma'am? Eleanor nodded confidently. Yes, my granddaughter. She was just practicing. While I shopped, she turned to Melody with pleading eyes. Please play along, she whispered. Melody studied Eleanor's face for a long moment, weighing trust against experience. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Sorry, Grandma, she said quietly. I got bored waiting. The guard looked. Between them, suspicion fading. Well, keep an eye on her. Kids shouldn't be wandering alone. After he walked away, Melody quickly gathered her few coins and stood, gripping her guitar protectively. Why did you help me? Because... Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I think I might be connected. The way you play, your features, you remind me of someone I lost. Melody's expression remained guarded. I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. I'm Eleanor, she said gently. Would you let me buy you breakfast? No strings attached. You can leave anytime you want. Melody's stomach growled audibly, betraying her hunger. They'll be looking for me, the TV people. I know somewhere they won't find us, Eleanor promised, and we can talk about what happens next. Your choice, not theirs. As they walked toward Eleanor's car, neither noticed the black SUV with tinted windows pulling into the park entrance, Victoria Reed in the passenger seat, scanning the crowds with determined eyes. Nor did they see Brian Miller's compact car approaching from the opposite direction, the social worker making calls to local shelters as he drove. The chess pieces were moving into position. But for this brief moment, Melody allowed herself to follow the kind woman who had lied to protect her, something no adult had done in a very long time. Eleanor's cozy breakfast diner sat tucked between a bookshop and a hardware store, far from the glitzy downtown where America's Rising Star filmed its episodes. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few patrons scattered among the red vinyl booths. My late husband and I came here every Sunday for 40 years, Eleanor explained as she slid into a corner booth that offered privacy and a view of the door. Best pancakes in the city. Melody sat opposite her, guitar case positioned protectively between her small body and the wall. Her eyes darted periodically to the entrance, a habit Eleanor recognized as hypervigilance. No one will find us here, Eleanor assured her gently. This place doesn't even have a television. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, approached with menus. Well, hello there, Eleanor. Who's your young friend? Eleanor hesitated, unsure how to introduce Melody without complications. I'm just a musician, Melody answered softly. We're discussing a possible arrangement. The waitress smiled, accepting this unusual explanation from a child. Well, musicians need fuel. Special today is blueberry pancakes with whipped cream. Melody's eyes widened slightly at the mention of such a treat. Can I really have that? Of course, Eleanor nodded. And hot chocolate too, if you'd like. While they waited for their food, Eleanor carefully broached the subject weighing on her mind. Melody, do you know much about your family? Your parents, perhaps? The girl's fingers traced patterns on the tabletop. My mom's name is Sarah. She gets sad sometimes, and in her mind to go away to get better. Melody looked up suddenly. But she's coming back, she promised. Eleanor felt her heart constrict. Sarah, she repeated softly. And was her last name Duncan? Or maybe, right? Melody stiffened, wariness returning to her expression. How do you know that? Before Eleanor could answer, the diner's bell jingled as a new customer entered. Melody instinctively shrank into her seat, but it was only an elderly man with a newspaper. I think, Eleanor said carefully, choosing each word with deliberation, that your mother might be my daughter, which would make me your grandmother. The waitress arrived with steaming plates of pancakes, momentarily interrupting the tension. Melody stared at Eleanor, processing this revelation as the sweet aroma of blueberries rose between them. If you're really my grandmother, Melody finally said, picking up her fork. Then, where have you been all this time? It was a fair question, devastating in its simplicity. Eleanor's eyes misted as she reached into her purse and withdrew a small photo album. I've been right here, she said, opening to a page with a photograph of a younger Eleanor beside a teenage girl with familiar eyes. But your mother and I lost each other a long time ago. I've been trying to find her for years. Melody's hand hovered over the photograph, not quite touching it. She has my guitar, the same one. Eleanor nodded, emotion catching in her throat. It belonged to your grandfather. He taught her to play. Outside the diner window, a black SUV drove slowly past. Victoria Reed scanning sidewalks from behind designer sunglasses. Melody, Eleanor said urgently, sensing their time was limited. I want to help you. But first I need to know. What happened? Where have you been? Staying? Melody looked down at her pancakes, then back at the woman who might be family. Promise you won't send me back to the bad places? I promise, Eleanor whispered, reaching cautiously across the table. After a moment's hesitation, Melody extended her small hand and placed it in Eleanor's. Weathered one. Eleanor's living room felt like stepping into a different era. Melody ran her fingers along the spines of old books on floor-to-ceiling shelves, while Eleanor made phone calls in the kitchen. Family photos adorned the walls, and in the corner stood an upright piano draped with a delicate embroidered shawl. Melody approached it cautiously, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She lifted the fall board to reveal ivory keys, some yellowed with age. Without touching them, she positioned her fingers in the air, mimicking chords she'd heard street musicians play. It was your grandfather's, Eleanor said, returning with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He taught your mother to play when she was even younger than you. Melody turned, her expression serious beyond her years. Did you call the TV people? Eleanor shook her head. No, but I did call someone who can help us. His name is Brian Miller from Child Protective Services. Fear flashed across Melody's face. They're the ones who take kids away. Not always, Eleanor explained gently. Sometimes they help families stay together. Brian wants to make sure you're safe, and he might be able to help us. Find your mother. Melody's fingers clutched her mug tightly. The last time they came, Mom got scared and we had to move in the middle of the night. She said they'd separate us. Eleanor sat down on the piano bench, patting the space beside her. After a moment's hesitation, Melody joined her. Your mother was afraid because she wasn't well, Eleanor explained. I lost touch with Sarah when she was 19. She was struggling with some shadows in her mind. I tried to get her help, but she saw it as me trying to control her. We argued, and she left. Eleanor's voice cracked. It was the worst mistake of my life letting her go without fighting harder. Melody absorbed this, her expression unreadable. She talks about the shadows, too. Sometimes they tell her scary things, and she gets confused about what's real. Eleanor nodded. It's called schizophrenia. It's an illness like having a fever, except it's in your thoughts. With the right help, people can learn to manage it. Is that where she is now? Getting help? Hope tinged Melody's question. I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to find out. The doorbell rang, causing Melody to jump. She grabbed her guitar case. Reflexively. It's okay, Eleanor assured her. That's probably Brian. Remember what I said, he's here to help. Eleanor opened the door to a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a worn briefcase. Mrs. Wright, I'm Brian Miller. His gaze moved past her to Melody, who stood watchfully by the piano. And you must be our musician. To everyone's surprise, the sound of screeching tires came from outside. Through the window, they saw Victoria Reed emerging from her SUV, a camera crew close behind. How did they find us? Eleanor gasped. Brian quickly closed the door. The hotel had your address? From when you called about Melody. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated this. Melody's face paled. They'll make me go back. No, they won't, Eleanor said firmly, drawing the curtains. There's a service entrance through the kitchen that leads to the back alley. My car is in the garage. Brian looked between them, making a quick decision. Mrs. Wright, taking Melody across state lines would be custodial interference. But I can see she trusts you, which is significant. He pulled out his card. I can stall them while you take her to this address. It's a family resource center where I have colleagues. We can start proper proceedings to establish guardianship, if that's what you both want. Knocking began at the front door, growing more insistent. Mrs. Wright, Victoria's voice called out. We know Melody is with you. We just want to ensure her welfare. Eleanor looked at Melody. What do you want to do, sweetheart? This is your choice. Melody glanced toward the piano, then at her guitar, and finally at the photo of her mother on Eleanor's wall. With a determined expression that echoed Sarah's, she nodded. I want to stay with you, and I want to find my mom. The knocking grew louder as Eleanor quickly gathered her purse and keys. As they slipped toward the kitchen, Melody paused at the piano, pressing one key that resonated through the apartment, the same note that began her song on America's Rising Star. It was both a goodbye and a promise to return. The family. Resource Center occupied a renovated Victorian house with cheerful yellow trim and a garden where children could play. Inside, warm colors and comfortable furniture created a space that felt nothing like the cold institutional buildings Melody had feared. 3 days had passed since their escape. From Eleanor's apartment, Brian had arranged temporary emergency placement for Melody with Eleanor, while the legal process began. Victoria Reed had been temporarily held at bay by a cease and desist letter from a lawyer friend of Brian's, citing exploitation of a minor without proper consent. In a sunny room decorated with children's artwork, Melody sat across from Dr. Lydia Chen, a child psychologist with a gentle voice and patient eyes. Do you know why we're talking today, Melody? Dr. Chen asked. Melody nodded, fingers absently mimicking chord patterns on her knee. To decide if I can stay with Eleanor. That's part of it, Dr. Chen smiled. I also want to hear about your experiences, your music, your mom, how you've been taking care of yourself. Would that be okay? Eleanor waited nervously in the hallway, watching through the window as Melody gradually opened up to Dr. Chen. The girl's expression shifted between wariness, sadness, and occasional flickers of joy when talking about music. Brian approached with 2 cups of coffee. "She's doing well," he observed, handing Eleanor a steaming mug. "Dr. Chen is the best. She specializes in children who've experienced instability. Have you found anything about Sarah?" Eleanor asked, the question that had consumed her thoughts for days. Brian hesitated. "We have a lead. A woman matching Sarah's description was admitted to Riverside Psychiatric Center 6 months ago. She stayed for 4 weeks, then was discharged, and with a treatment plan. The records show she listed a shelter as her address." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. Was she alone?" "Yes," Brian confirmed gently. "The intake forms mention a daughter but state that she was staying with family, which we now know wasn't accurate." Eleanor pressed her fingers to her temples. She might have believed it, though. Sarah's illness sometimes creates false memories or beliefs. She looked up suddenly. Riverside is only 2 hours from here. She could still be in the area. Inside the room, Dr. Chen was showing Melody a technique using a small sandbox with miniature figures, a therapeutic tool to help children express situations they found difficult to verbalize. "Can you show me what your days were like before the TV show?" Dr. Chen asked. Carefully, Melody arranged figures in the sand. A small girl near a tree, a collection of people walking past, a tiny guitar, a bench, a building with many windows. "I played my guitar here," she explained, pointing to the park figure. "When it got dark, I'd go to the library until closing time. Miss Joanna at the front desk pretended not to notice me reading in the corner section." "And, where did you sleep?" Dr. Chen asked gently. Melody's hand hovered over the sand, then placed a small house figure behind the library. "There's a shed where they keep gardening tools. In winter, I'd go to the train station instead." Outside, Eleanor listened with her heart breaking, imagining her granddaughter, Sarah's child, sleeping in sheds and stations while she'd been just across town in her comfortable apartment, unaware. "I brought something to show you," Dr. Chen said, reaching for her bag. She pulled out a tablet and turned it on. "Have you seen this?" On the screen was a news segment about Melody's disappearance from the show. The headline read, "America's Rising Star Mystery. Where is the Guitar Girl?" Melody watched with wide eyes as the camera showed crowds of people holding candles in a park vigil. Signs read, "We care about Melody," and "Music heals." Children had brought drawings of guitars and musical notes. "All these people are worried about you," Dr. Chen explained. "They were touched by your song and your story." A new segment began showing Victoria Reed at a press conference. "We're deeply concerned about Melody's well-being and are cooperating fully with authorities to ensure her safety." Melody's expression darkened. "She just wants me for her show." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "Adults don't always have the best intentions. That's why it's important that you have people like Eleanor and Brian looking out for your interests now." As the session concluded, Melody emerged from the room looking emotionally drained but somehow lighter. She walked directly to Eleanor and, for the first time, initiated a hug. Eleanor embraced her gently, feeling the small body relax against her. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Melody looked up, determination shining in her eyes. "Dr. Chen says I'm brave, and she thinks Mom might be trying to get better." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Can we find her soon?" Before Eleanor could answer, Brian's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened to the caller. "It's the shelter near Riverside," he told them. After hanging up, "They think Sarah was there until last week. And there's more. She was asking if anyone had seen a little girl with a guitar on TV." The Riverside shelter occupied a converted church with stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across the worn linoleum floor. Eleanor. Melody stood in the entryway, Brian beside them speaking quietly with the shelter coordinator, Ms. Patel. "She stayed here for almost 3 months, Ms. Patel explained, consulting her records. "Very quiet, kept to herself mostly, but she was taking her medication regularly, attending group therapy." The clinic next door. "And you're certain it was Sarah?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely steady. After 20 years of searching, being this close felt surreal. Ms. Patel nodded. Sarah Duncan, though she sometimes used the name right as well. When that talent show aired, she became very agitated. Said the little girl was her daughter. She kept asking to use our computer to watch the clip over and over. Melody squeezed Eleanor's hand, hope and anxiety battling in her expression. Did she say where she was going? Brian asked. She mentioned finding work at Harmony Gardens. It's a plant nursery on the edge of town that has a program for adults in recovery. Ms. Patel hesitated. I shouldn't say this officially, but she really seemed to be doing better. There was a clarity in her eyes that wasn't there when she first arrived. They thanked Ms. Patel and returned to Eleanor's car. As they drove toward Harmony Gardens, Melody sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, plucking softly at her guitar strings without producing actual notes. Are you okay, sweetheart? Eleanor asked, watching her in the rearview mirror. Melody looked up, vulnerability plain on her face. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she got better because I wasn't there making things harder? Eleanor pulled the car over, turning to face her granddaughter fully. Melody, listen to me. Your mother loves you. She's been unwell, but that was never your fault. The fact that she recognized you on TV and immediately started asking about you proves she's been thinking about you all along. Mrs. Wright is right, Brian added gently. People with your mom's condition sometimes get overwhelmed by their responsibilities. It doesn't mean they don't care. Melody nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, creased photograph showing a younger Sarah holding toddler Melody on her lap, both smiling at the camera. This is how I remember her, Melody said, holding up the photo. Before the shadows got too loud, Eleanor blinked back. Tears as she recognized the setting. It was her own backyard, a family barbecue from years ago. She hadn't known Sarah had been there with a child. How had they missed each other by mere hours that day? Harmony Gardens appeared ahead, a sprawling nursery with greenhouses and outdoor displays of plants. As they parked, Brian's phone rang. His expression grew serious as he listened. That was my supervisor, he said after hanging up. Victoria Reed has filed a formal complaint claiming Eleanor kidnapped Melody from the show. It's baseless given the circumstances, but they're sending officers to interview you both. Can they take me away? Melody asked, fear returning to her voice. No, Brian assured her firmly. The emergency placement is legally sound, but this could complicate things if we don't find Sarah soon to establish the family connection officially. As they walked toward the nursery entrance, a delivery truck pulled up nearby. Workers began unloading plants, directed by a slender woman with her back to them, her hair tied in a practical bun, clipboard in hand. Melody froze suddenly, her guitar case slipping from her fingers to the gravel with a soft thud. The woman turned at the sound, clipboard lowering slowly as she registered the 3 figures standing there. The clipboard fell completely as her hand flew to her mouth. Time seemed suspended as mother and daughter stared at each other across the small parking lot. Sarah looked thinner, older than Eleanor remembered, but her eyes, Melody's eyes, were clear and aware. Melody, Sarah whispered, her voice carrying on the quiet afternoon air. And then Melody was running, feet barely touching the ground as she flew across the distance between them. Sarah knelt, arms opening just in time to catch her daughter in an embrace that spoke of years of separation and a love that had never diminished. Eleanor watched, tears flowing freely now, as Sarah looked up over Melody's shoulder, and their eyes met for the first time in 2 decades. Mom, Sarah said in disbelief, still holding Melody tight against her. Is it really you? 3 generations connected by music, pain, and resilience, finally reunited among the flowers and growing things of Harmony Gardens. Harmony Gardens provided a small meeting room in the back of their gift shop, a space usually reserved for gardening workshops. Now, it contained the nervous energy of a family reconnecting across years of absence and misunderstanding. Sarah sat with Melody pressed against her side, as if afraid her daughter might disappear if she loosened her hold. Eleanor sat across from them, hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. Brian had tactfully excused himself to make calls outside, giving the family privacy while still remaining nearby. "I can't believe you found each other," Sarah said, looking between Melody and Eleanor. "I've imagined this moment so many times, but never thought it would actually happen. Grandma saw me on TV," Melody explained, her voice lighter than Eleanor had ever heard it. "She recognized me because I look like you." Sarah smoothed Melody's hair with gentle fingers. "You have your grandfather's musical talent, though." She glanced at Eleanor. "Dad's gift skipped a generation. I could only ever play what was written on the page, never create like he could, like Melody can," Eleanor added softly. A delicate silence fell over the room, filled with unspoken questions and explanations, too complex for the moment. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath. "Melody, I need to explain something to you." She chose her words carefully. "When I left you at the bus station that day, I truly believed I was meeting my sister who would take care of you while I went to the hospital." Melody looked confused. "But you don't have a sister." "I know that now," Sarah said, pain evident in her voice. "The shadows, my illness, it was very bad then. I was seeing and hearing things that weren't real. When I realized what had happened, I was already in the hospital, and they wouldn't let me leave to find you." Eleanor reached across the table hesitantly. "Sarah, why didn't you call me? Even after all our disagreements, I would have come immediately." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "The shadows told me you had changed your number, that you didn't want to be found. By the time the medication cleared my thinking enough to question that, weeks had passed." She looked down at Melody. "I've been searching for you ever since, my little songbird. Every shelter, every children's home within 100 miles. Melody leaned into her mother. "I waited at the bus station until dark. Then I remembered what you always said. If we got separated, I should go somewhere with music." Sarah nodded, more tears falling. "The park where the street musicians play. I stayed there for a long time," Melody continued. "People were kind. Mr. Garcia at the taco stand gave me leftovers. The librarian pretended not to notice me sleeping in the reading corner sometimes." Eleanor's heart ached at these glimpses into Melody's survival. "You're incredibly brave, Melody, but you shouldn't have had to be." The door opened as Brian returned, accompanied by Ms. Patel from the shelter. "Sarah," Ms. Patel said gently, "I've been talking with Mr. Miller about your situation. I want you to know that your progress has been remarkable. Dr. Brennan from the clinic has offered to speak on your behalf regarding your treatment compliance." Brian nodded encouragingly. "We're putting together a family reunification plan. It will take time. Supervised visits at first, continued treatment, stable housing, but the goal is to keep you all together." Sarah's grip on Melody tightened slightly. "What about now, today? Where will Melody go?" "She's currently in emergency placement with Mrs. Wright," Brian explained. "That can continue while we work through the process, with regular visits between you and Melody." "Or," Eleanor said, surprising herself with the clarity of her sudden decision, "Sarah could come stay with us too. My house has plenty of room, and it would provide the stable environment and family support the court will be looking for." The surprise on Sarah's face slowly transformed into cautious hope. "You'd do that? After everything?" "You're my daughter," Eleanor said simply. "And Melody is my granddaughter. We've lost 20 years already. I don't want to lose another day." As the adults discussed logistics and next steps, Melody slipped her hand into her mother's worn canvas bag and pulled out a familiar item, a small wooden metronome, its brass pendulum still shiny despite the scuffed case. "You kept Grandpa's metronome," Melody whispered in wonder. Sarah nodded, watching as Melody set it on the table and started its steady rhythm. Tick, 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 a heartbeat of shared musical heritage connecting all 3 generations. "Some things," Sarah said, looking meaningfully at Eleanor, are too precious to lose, even when everything else falls apart. 1 week had passed since the reunion at Harmony Gardens. The Wright home was slowly adjusting to its new rhythm, with 3 generations under one roof. Sarah slept in her childhood bedroom, now attending outpatient therapy 3 times weekly. Melody had the guest room, which Eleanor had hurriedly decorated with colorful quilts and a small desk for drawing. Progress came in small moments, Sarah teaching Melody to make pancakes, Eleanor finding her old sheet music for them to play together, evenings spent on the porch swing sharing gentle conversations that carefully navigated around the most painful memories. But on this particular morning, the delicate peace was shattered by a sharp knock at the front. "Do be Mrs. Wright?" 2 police officers stood on the porch, their expressions professionally neutral. "We have some questions regarding a complaint filed by America's Rising Star Productions." Behind them, a news van pulled up to the curb. A cameraman emerged, followed by Victoria Reed in an impeccable pantsuit. "They found us," Sarah whispered, moving protectively toward Melody. Eleanor squared her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "Officers, that woman is exploiting a vulnerable child for ratings. We have temporary custody arrangements through Child Protective Services." Victoria approached, her smile camera ready. "We simply want what's best for Melody. The viewing public is concerned about her welfare, and the contract clearly states—" "A contract no legal guardian ever signed," interrupted a new voice. Brian Miller walked briskly up the path, folder in hand. "Officers, I'm the assigned caseworker. I have all the relevant documentation right here." As the adults argued outside, Melody slipped away to the back garden, guitar in hand. The raised voices reminded her too much of uncertain times before. She played softly, trying to drown out the conflict with music. Sarah found her there minutes later, sitting beneath the apple tree. "Are they going to take me back to the show?" Melody asked, fingers still moving across the strings. Sarah sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "No, sweetheart. Brian and Grandma won't let that happen. But Victoria said I have to finish the competition, that people are waiting." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Victoria Reed doesn't decide your future. We do, you, me, and Grandma. Together." From the kitchen window, Eleanor watched them, her heart full yet troubled. The legal battle ahead would be challenging, but seeing her daughter and granddaughter together gave her strength. She would protect this fragile new beginning, no matter what. Outside, cameras continued to roll, catching the perfect dramatic footage for that evening's sensational news story. The courthouse corridors echoed with footsteps as Eleanor, Sarah, and Melody followed their attorney toward courtroom B. 2 weeks of legal maneuvering had culminated in today's emergency hearing. Victoria Reed's production company seeking an injunction to compel Melody's return to America's Rising Star for the season finale. "Remember," their lawyer whispered, "let me do the talking. The judge will likely ask Melody some questions, but she should just answer honestly." Melody nodded, clutching her grandfather's metronome instead of her guitar, which they'd been advised to leave at home to avoid playing into the musical prodigy narrative the show was promoting. Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat confidently beside her team of corporate attorneys. When she spotted Melody, she offered a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All rise," announced the bailiff as Judge Martinez entered, her expression giving away nothing as she surveyed the unusual case before her. The proceedings began with Victoria's lead attorney presenting their position, emphasizing the opportunities awaiting Melody, the public interest in her welfare, and the contractual obligations that were being violated. When their own attorney rose to respond, the courtroom doors suddenly opened. A tall man in a crisp suit entered, followed by several others carrying documents. "Your Honor," the man announced, "I'm James Anderson, executive producer of America's Rising Star." Victoria's expression froze in shock. James was supposed to be in New York handling network meetings, not here interfering with her plans. "Mr. Anderson," the judge acknowledged, "this is unexpected. I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor. but I felt compelled to appear when I learned the full circumstances of this case. James placed a thick folder on the evidence table. These are internal communications showing that Ms. Reed was repeatedly advised by our legal team that Melody's participation without proper guardian consent was legally questionable. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Victoria half rose from her seat, face flushing with anger and betrayal. Furthermore, James continued, I've brought affidavits from our child welfare consultant who resigned in protest over the handling of this situation. Melody watched wide-eyed as the adults argued over her future. Sarah squeezed her hand reassuringly, though her own fingers trembled slightly. After reviewing the new evidence, Judge Martinez removed her glasses and looked directly at Melody. Young lady, a lot of people seem very concerned about what you should do, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you want? The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the small girl whose extraordinary voice had started this chain of events. Melody stood slowly, her voice barely audible at first. I just wanted food and a safe place to sleep. She looked at Eleanor and Sarah. Now I have that. I have my family. Her voice grew stronger. I don't want to be on TV anymore. I just want to be a regular kid who plays music because she loves it, not because people are watching. The simplicity and wisdom of her answer hung in the air. Judge Martinez nodded, a rare smile softening her features. Then that's exactly what you shall have. 3 months after the 8th courthouse victory, autumn painted Eleanor's neighborhood in brilliant reds and golds. Inside the Wright home, the aroma of apple cider filled the air as Sarah and Melody worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing treats for Melody's first-ever birthday celebration. 10 years old, Sarah mused. Sarah, showing Melody how to cut star shapes from pie dough. Double digits is a big milestone. Did you have parties when you were little? Melody asked, carefully arranging her stars atop the apple filling. Every year, Sarah smiled, glancing toward the living room where Eleanor was hanging streamers. Mom always made sure there was music and games, even when money was tight. The doorbell rang and Melody rushed to answer, flour dusting her cheeks. Brian Miller stood on the porch holding a wrapped package. Am I the first one here? He asked, stepping inside. Dr. Chen is already in the backyard. Setting up the music corner, Melody explained, leading him through the house. The backyard had been transformed with fairy lights and colorful fall decorations. A small area held child-sized instruments, a gift from Dr. Chen's music therapy program, where Melody now attended weekly sessions. Alongside her regular schooling, Eleanor emerged from the garage carrying a large case. Melody, could you help me with something? Curious, Melody followed her grandmother. Inside the garage, Eleanor opened the case to reveal a beautiful vintage acoustic guitar, smaller than a standard adult size, but larger than Melody's current instrument. This was your grandfather's travel guitar, Eleanor explained. He had smaller hands like you. I thought you might have grown enough to play it now. Melody touched the polished wood reverently. It's beautiful. It needs someone to play it, Eleanor said softly. Instruments get lonely sitting in cases. Sarah appeared at the garage door, watching the exchange with glistening eyes. Dad would be so proud to see it in your hands, Melody. A car pulled up outside, and children's voices called Melody's name. New friends from her homeschool co-op program arriving with their parents for the party. Can I show them? Melody asked, carefully lifting the guitar. Of course, Eleanor nodded. It's yours now. As Melody ran to greet her friends, Sarah stepped beside her mother. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for the guitar, but for everything, for giving us both a second chance. Eleanor took her daughter's hand, noting how the tremors that had been present in those first difficult weeks had steadily diminished with proper medication and support. Family doesn't get just one chance, she replied. We get as many as we need. Later, as the small gathering enjoyed cake in the yard, Melody picked up her grandfather's guitar. The conversations quieted as she began to play. Not the sorrowful melody from her television appearance, but something new and hopeful, composed during her therapy sessions. Sarah recognized fragments of lullabies she'd sung to Melody as a toddler, woven together with classical pieces Eleanor had taught Sarah long ago. 3 generations of music merged into something uniquely Melody's own. When she finished, the applause was genuine and warm, not the manufactured excitement of a television audience, but the authentic appreciation of people who cared about the musician, not just the music. The shadows hadn't disappeared entirely from their lives, but they had receded, making room for light, for growth, for healing. One day at a time, one note at a time. They were learning to play a new song together. 6 months had passed since Melody's birthday celebration. Winter had given way to spring, bringing new routines and steady progress. Sarah now worked part-time at Harmony Gardens, while continuing her treatment program. Melody thrived in her homeschool arrangement, with plans to transition to regular school in the fall. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor returned from grocery shopping to find Melody and Sarah in the living room, staring at the television with stunned expressions. "What's wrong?" Eleanor asked, setting down her bags. Wordlessly, Sarah pointed at the screen where America's Rising Star was playing its season finale. The camera panned across the audience, pausing dramatically on an empty seat with a single spotlight illuminating it. "As we conclude tonight's competition," James Anderson announced from the stage, "we want to acknowledge someone special. Melody's journey reminded us that talent shows should discover artists, not create them, and certainly not exploit them." The camera cut to James unveiling a large check. "Tonight, we're establishing the Melody Wright Foundation for Young Musicians, providing instruments, lessons, and support to children facing hardships." Eleanor sank onto the couch beside Melody, who watched with wide, astonished eyes. "They used my real last name," she whispered. "Right." The doorbell rang, startling them all. Sarah peeked through the curtains and gasped. "It's news vans," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "At least 3 of them." The phone began ringing simultaneously. Eleanor checked the caller ID. "It's Brian," she said, answering quickly. "Brian, are you seeing this?" "I am," he confirmed. "James Anderson's office contacted me last week, but I was sworn to secrecy until..." The announcement aired. "They're serious about the foundation, Eleanor. They want Melody to be the honorary chairperson. No performances, no publicity unless she wants it, just her name and story as inspiration." The doorbell rang again, more insistently. The family huddled together in the living room, the unexpected return of public attention bringing back uncomfortable memories. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Melody's protectively. Melody looked thoughtful, her fingers tapping a rhythm on her knee, a habit she'd developed when working through difficult decisions in therapy. "All those kids," she said finally. "Kids like me, with music inside them but no way to let it out. They need instruments and teachers." She stood up and walked to the window, peeking out at the gathering media. "I don't want to be on TV again," she said firmly. "But maybe..." She turned to Eleanor and Sarah, her expression resolute beyond her years. "Maybe we could help write the rules for the foundation. Make sure it really helps kids, not just looks good on television." Eleanor and Sarah exchanged glances, seeing in Melody's suggestion the perfect balance of caution and compassion. "We can talk to Brian about setting boundaries," Eleanor agreed. "Maybe a written statement instead of interviews." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "We decide how much or how little to share, on our terms." The phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed James Anderson's direct line. Melody looked at the guitar propped in the corner of the room, her grandfather's instrument that had become her voice, her comfort, her connection to a family legacy once lost but now reclaimed. "We could help a lot of other kids find their music," she said softly. Eleanor answered the phone, her voice clear and confident. "Mr. Anderson, this is Eleanor Wright. We've seen your announcement and we'd like to discuss some conditions." Outside, the media waited for their story. Inside, a family stood united, turning an unwanted spotlight into a chance to bring music to children who needed it most, just as Melody once had. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" Eleanor adjusted Melody's collar as they sat backstage at the community center. 1 year had passed since the establishment of the Melody Wright Foundation, which had already provided instruments and lessons to over 200 children nationwide. Today marked their first public event, a small concert featuring young musicians who had received foundation support. Melody had agreed to make a brief appearance to welcome the audience, but not to perform. "I'm nervous," Melody admitted, "but Dr. Chen says it's good to face your fears when you're ready, not when someone else tells you to." Sarah entered the room carrying a glass of water for Melody. Her hands were steady now, her eyes clear and present. The structured routine of family life, consistent treatment, and meaningful work at Harmony Gardens had brought stability she hadn't known in years. 5 minutes until showtime, the event coordinator announced through the door. Melody peeked through the curtain at the gathering crowd. Unlike the dazzling studio audience of America's Rising Star, this group consisted mostly of families, music teachers, and community supporters. In the front row, she spotted Brian and Dr. Chen sitting together, chatting amicably. "No cameras except the official photographer," Sarah confirmed, having just checked the entrance. "Just like we agreed." James Anderson approached, respectfully keeping some distance. His involvement with the foundation had proven genuine, and over months of careful collaboration, he had earned a measure of the family's trust. "Everything's set," he reported. "Whenever you're ready, Melody." The lights dimmed in the auditorium. Eleanor and Sarah gave Melody encouraging hugs before taking their seats in the audience. Alone backstage, Melody took a deep breath, remembering how far she had come from that frightened girl asking for food in exchange for her song. She stepped onto the stage to warm applause. The spotlight felt different this time, gentle rather than blinding, inviting rather than exposing. "Hello," she began, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Melody Wright. Last year I went on television because I was hungry and alone. Today I'm here because no child should have to sing for their supper." The simplicity of her words brought a hush over the audience. "The young musicians you'll hear tonight all have their own stories. Some face challenges like I did, others have different obstacles, but music helps us all find our way home." She gestured to where Eleanor and Sarah sat. "I found mine. Now we want to help others find theirs." As she left the stage to heartfelt applause, the first young performer entered, a boy about Melody's age carrying a violin that bore the foundation's small emblem on its case. From her seat between Eleanor and Sarah, Melody watched the performances with shining eyes. When the final musician finished, the event coordinator approached their row with an unexpected request. "The students have prepared a surprise," she whispered. "They'd like Melody to join them for the finale." Melody looked uncertainly at her mother and grandmother. "It's your choice," Sarah assured her. "Only if you want to." Melody considered for a moment, then nodded and made her way backstage. The young musicians circled around her excitedly, showing her the sheet music they had practiced. "We learned your song," the violin boy explained. "The one from the TV show, but we gave it a happier ending." When Melody returned to the stage with the children, she carried her grandfather's guitar. As they began to play her original melody, now transformed by additional instruments and a major key resolution, she felt a circle completing. The song that had once been a cry for help now served as an anthem of hope for others. In the audience, Eleanor reached for Sarah's hand as they watched Melody play, not for survival this time, but from a place of security and purpose. The music soared, carrying with it the promise that even the most broken beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. 2 years had passed since Melody's first appearance on America's Rising Star. The Wright home, once a place of cautious reunions and healing, now resonated with the comfortable rhythms of family life. On this summer afternoon, the backyard hummed with activity as Eleanor, Sarah, and Melody prepared for a special gathering. Small tables adorned with wildflowers dotted the lawn. A makeshift stage stood beneath the old oak tree, festooned with twinkling lights. "Is the sound system working?" Sarah called to Brian, who had arrived early to help set up. He gave a thumbs up from beside the speakers. "All tested and ready to go." Melody, now 12, arranged chairs in a semicircle facing the stage. Her movements were confident, her smile easy, a far cry from the wary child who once played for coins in the park. "Nervous?" Eleanor asked, joining her granddaughter. "A little," Melody admitted. "But it's the good kind of nervous." Today marked the culmination of a journey none of them could have imagined 2 years earlier, the first graduation ceremony for local students of the Melody Wright Foundation. 15 children who had received instruments and lessons would perform for their families and friends, showcasing their progress. Guests began arriving, parents, siblings, music teachers, and supporters. Among them was James Anderson, who had left America's Rising Star to work full-time with the foundation, transforming his career from entertainment executive to advocate for accessible music education. Dr. Chen arrived with a surprise, a beautifully bound book containing letters from children across the country who had benefited from the foundation's programs. As the ceremony began, Sarah stepped onto the stage, her quiet confidence a testament to her continued recovery. "Welcome, everyone. Today, we celebrate not just musical achievement, but perseverance, healing, and community." She glanced at Melody with pride. Sometimes the most beautiful symphonies begin with a single note played in the darkest times. The student performances followed, some polished, others endearingly imperfect, all meaningful. Each child shared a brief story of what music had brought to their lives: confidence, discipline, joy, expression, connection. Finally, Eleanor joined Sarah on stage. "We have one more special performance today." Melody walked to the stage carrying both her guitars, the small, battered one from her days on the streets, and her grandfather's restored instrument. She positioned herself between her mother and grandmother. "2 years ago, I asked a question that changed my life," Melody addressed the audience. "Today, I want to play the answer I found." Together, the 3 generations of Wright women began to play, Eleanor on piano, Sarah on a small hand drum, and Melody leading with her guitar. The composition wove together fragments from their shared musical heritage, transformed into something wholly new. It spoke of loss and discovery, separation and reunion, sorrow and joy, the full spectrum of their journey together. As the final notes faded into the summer air, Melody looked at her mother and grandmother, her eyes bright with unshed tears and immeasurable love. "This is what I was looking for," she said softly, though her microphone carried the words to everyone present. "Not fame or applause, but this, our family harmony." The music they created together that day wasn't perfect. No true family harmony ever is, but its very imperfections made it authentic, meaningful, and unbreakably strong. For Melody, Eleanor, and Sarah Wright, the song would continue, evolving with new chapters and challenges, but always finding its way back to the perfect cadence of home.